In this video, I'll be sharing with you how I came about this design, and I'll be doing that in Photoshop. I realized that it's usually difficult and it can take a very long process for me to show you my design thoughts and process while I'm doing the design. So I figured out, why not when I'm done with the design, I explain how everything happened. So in this video, I'll be doing that, and this will be my first attempt on it. So if you find it really good and helpful, please make sure to leave a like and share as well. And if you are new to the channel, do subscribe, and let us get started. So in Photoshop, I started with a square document. I usually love working with 2000 by 2000 pixels, as you can see over here. And that helps me maintain something good for Instagram, which is 1080 by 1080. Of course, Instagram will still have to beat it down to 1080 by 1080, but it will remain a good quality because the pixels are not too high above the Instagram ratio or specification, and it can also fit into many other social media handles. Then I first made a black background when I started, created a color fill for black, and then I brought in this background. So this is originally how the background is. I dropped in this background here because I wanted this kind of dark shade and on the upper area of the design and something bright in the middle. I didn't really mind what will be here because I will be taking care of that later. And then I blurred it out to give me this effect. The Gaussian blur I used was 40.1 pixels in radius. And then I added a layer mask and brushed it up. I used a soft round brush, and the soft round brush hardness was of course 0 because it is a soft round brush, and my opacity and flow smoothness was 100, 110 respectively, angle 0. Then I proceeded to bring in another background, which is this one, because I didn't want the bright inside to be too bright. I brought in this background, and I will be taking out the bottom part so that we will still have something like this. So in the first one we have this, and then we have this in the second one, and of course I blurred it as well. So we have this. So without this we have this. So we're just having this area as the effect, and then this one taking over the top. And then you'd wonder, what about this bright area? Well, I had a change of thought, honestly, and decided to go with something different. And that something different is actually this. So I wanted this to be the centerpiece where the focus of the design will be. And I found this kind of I don't know what to call it, but it looks like a vortex. And in the vortex, I took out the surrounding areas so that everything doesn't look black, because if I do that, it will cover the rest of every other image underneath. So I left this part this way and went ahead to add more effects, which is this light. This light is actually just this background. So I took out some parts and liquefied it. I'll show you why this was liquefied, but for now I'll leave it this way because I had not done that process yet. And I made more effects, more background, added a golden curtain. This is the full image itself. Duplicated it and placed the other one this side. So rotated it a little bit so that I will have some balance in here and down here as well. Then I went ahead to create this detail. Now this is the only real detail in this design. This is the only real detail in this design. Every other thing in this design is practically made up. It's practically made up, but I'll be showing you shortly how everything went about. So the colors actually didn't matter because I was still going to handle that later. And first of all, I wrote the 20, the years, and of course reunion. And then I cut out some part of the 20 following the years. And how I did that was holding the control button and pressing the thumbnail for the years. And by so doing, I selected the years. I can't remember the actual pixel I used here, but if I'm taking a wild guess, it could be 10. So I went to select, modify, and expand to expand the selection. And let me try 10. Of course, it's 10. So now now that this area was selected, I went over to 20. Let me just redo that for you to see. I'll delete this. So this is how it looks like at first. And I went over to 20 and clicked on this layer shape. Sorry, I held the Alt key and clicked on this layer mask, and it's simply just maxed out that area for me. So that was how I achieved this, and the reunion just underneath. Then I started adding effects. First, I did the whole effect on 20 and copied it to the rest. So the first effect I placed was the bevel and emboss. Place the bevel and emboss to give it some shiny edge, and I used this bevel and emboss setting 90, 30 for the altitude and 90 for the angle, and I made the opacity for the highlights 80 and that of the shadow 20. I left every other thing on default as it was, and this was the setting I used for the bevel and emboss. Inner bevel smooth, depth is 74, size 17, soften 0. I didn't want something soft because it will look like this. I wanted it to show very well, and I gave it a little color overlay of red and then a gradient. Actually, this gradient wasn't going to show. Oh, it showed. What? Okay, yeah, I remember now. So I placed a gradient first, and it was looking too yellowish for me. This was how it was looking, a little bit close to greenish yellow. So I didn't like that. I had to create a color overlay, and of course, if you put a color overlay over gradient, it will override the gradient practically. But the blend mode here is screen, so it didn't override it. On normal, this is how it would look like, but because I placed it on screen, it blended both the red and the gradient overlay together. And I clicked on OK and copied that setting by actually holding the Alt key down in my keyboard, or the Options key if you're using a Mac, and pressing and holding the effect and dragging it over to the rest. Or you could also do it by right clicking, copy layer style, and then selecting the rest of the layers that you want to paste the layer style, right click and paste layer style. So while I have done that, I multiply the effect onto the rest of the write-up. Then I put them in a group and added even more effects. So I added a texture effect in the group. So that's why you see this texture with the bevel and emboss. So with the bevel and emboss, every setting still the same, nothing changed. If you can remember, just I reduced the opacity for the screen, which was around 80 before. So I reduced the opacity, added a texture of this pattern. This should be water. Yes, it should be this. And then I went on to adjust it to the size which I wanted, 100 and plus 100 for the depth. And I added also a stroke effect to give it that white edge, that thin white edge, just a very small pixel stroke effect of white. And I added a drop shadow to make it a little bit more visible, because it seemed like this area was being crowded out or overshadowed by, let's say overshadowed or over brightened by the circle, by the vortex. So I added a drop shadow to have a contrast between it and the background. So this is before the drop shadow and this is after the drop shadow. And that was what I did in the group. And I added another group and also gave it even more drop shadow. Now you'd say, why wouldn't I just create the drop shadow in this one? Well, I didn't want to because it wasn't giving me the result I wanted. So I wanted to retain the first drop shadow because I wanted that edge. Because when I make this drop shadow bigger, it's either going to fade out too much, and then the effect I want to be close to the edge will not be achieved. So this drop shadow is giving me that effect close to the edge because it is not much, and then this one goes even bigger. And of course, I duplicated it because I wouldn't want to lose everything I wanted. I duplicated it and converted it to a smart object. Why do I need to duplicate it if I know that if I double click on this thumbnail, I can actually still go back and change the settings? And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, if you double click on this thumbnail, you can go back to open this area and change whatever you want to change in it. But I wanted to also be able to see the background of the design I'm working on while changing. So instead of working on this one, I can just turn this off, do whatever change I want on this one, delete this one, duplicate it again, and convert it to a smart object. And when I did that, I added an even more drop shadow. But if you can see, there is a little difference in the whole thing now. So what I did was to transform, right click, and warp. So this was the effect I did while warping it. This was what I did while warping it to give it that shape it has. So you can't really actually write this 20-edge reunion and get it exactly this way, no matter how you want to resize it, if you don't warp it to this exact point. Then I turned this off so that there won't be two, and I added even more drop shadow to it because I just wanted it to have more isolation. It wasn't still as isolated as I want. So this is the first. Let's start with this. This is the first, not even the first drop shadow. The first drop shadow is inside. So this is the first drop shadow. This is the second drop shadow that gave it even something much more at the edge, like I explained before, that effect I wanted at the edge of the text. And turning this off, this is the combined drop shadow of everything. So it still has that effect and still has even more drop shadow. So this is without the new drop shadow, just having the drop shadows of these ones, and this is with the drop shadow. So we've taken much time on that. Then I added this texture background. This is what it looks like. This is what this texture looks like, and that is because it is power clipped inside this group. So this is what this texture looked like, and the power clipped it inside this group, and it looked like this. And you might be confused, like, why isn't it looking? It looks like there are some spillovers here, and that's because of this drop shadow. So this is a drop shadow one, and if I turn off this drop shadow inside this one as well, it's going to take care of that spillovers. So as you can see, there is none of that now. But for just some mystery and, source, whatever you would call it, questions that might need answers, which I love to put in my designs, I had to leave it this way so that people will be like, why is this like this? So now you know why this is like this. And what was the texture? What was the setting I used here again? I used color dodge. Wonderful. I forgot. Wow. So I used color dodge here, and that did it for the main spotlight, the main reason for the flyer. It's a 20 years reunion. And of course, like I told you before, every detail here is not real. It is made up. But this is a real flyer design I made for a client, but it's a non-disclosure agreement flyer. So I am not meant to show you the full details. I am not even meant to post this with the full details online. So that is why I had to improvise with made up details. First of all, the venue, somewhere in Akaville, Mass. This wasn't actually the first thing I wrote, of course. Maybe we should start at the top. So this goes, and first of all, the logo. The logo has a green and white tint color combination to it. So this is the logo, and this is the most international known to man. Yeah, I don't have to say that word. Yes, and this is the most international known to man. Then I know you really want to guess this, and added a drop shadow. I think you already understand why I do that. Then of course we should have a theme for the event, and this is the theme, and being the real brotherly, whatever. But I noticed that this theme is kind of not standing out, so I created a drop shadow for it and separated the drop shadow from the real image itself and power clipped it into this. And that is because I didn't want the drop shadow to fall over this area. I didn't want it to be showing over this area because without the power clipping, it's going to be showing. So what was my solution? It was either to double this, make one black, put it underneath the one on top, which is white, drag it down a little, reposition it to be exactly at this point where the black one is, and power clip it into this, or just simply create a drop shadow, separate it out. And how do you separate a drop shadow from an image itself? So let's just take something that has only a drop shadow. I know you really want to guess this. So this has a drop shadow. No, I think I'll be using this. It has to. Well, here you go. So I know you really want to guess this only has a drop shadow as its layer style. If you right click on this one, not on this side, if you right click here, you are likely not going to see it. But if you right click this area, you will see where it says create layer. When you do that, it will ask you of this and you say okay, and it will separate your drop shadow from the main image. So you can now drag this and walk around it with whatever you want to do. But mind you that you cannot adjust this drop shadow settings, so it sticks. So back to the theme being the real brotherly. I added a drop shadow. Do I need to keep saying drop shadows? I think this design is just filled with drop shadows. Just everywhere drop shadows. Even one effect I had to have up to 4 drop shadows. And I did a bevel and emboss, still the same settings, soften, and I changed a little thing here and this area as well. And I clicked on OK. So we have this subtle chromatic looking text. Then of course we should have a date for the event. So it is going to be holding in February the 10th to the 17th of 3056. And for emphasis, we should make it visible, much more visible, so that it doesn't just hide away from every other thing. And I used a red circle. That red circle will drag people to the eye, to drag people's eyes to the red spot. Then I finished the final detail up by adding a venue, which you already know is somewhere in Ackerville, Mass. When I was making up this venue, I never knew there was somewhere called Backerville or Bakerville. And I searched it up. I searched up Ackerville to actually know if there is somewhere called this, and I found Bakerville. So it's just merely a coincidence. And then for the final touch, I tried a camera raw effect to give it much more beauty, but I didn't get what I wanted. So I used curves and hue saturation. This was my setting for the hue saturation, and this was my settings for the curves. And that is how I created this design. So I liquefied these lights to wrap around or follow the part of the edge of the 20, and this was what we got. How do you liquefy? You go into filter and you find liquefy, but because I've done this before, I'll just double click on this and I'll show you how. Most times when you want to liquefy, you will not see the rest of the design, and that's because the show backdrop is off. But for you to have a guide of what you want to do, you can turn it on and it's going to fade it out a little so that you see it depending on the opacity you give it. So if you make it 100, this is how it will look like. But this time around, it's not going to distinguish what you're actually liquefying. It's not going to tell you the edges and everything. So I like keeping it at 50. so that by so doing I will know where the main object I'm liquefying is. Then when you are done, you can preview, you can reconstruct, you can restore, and you can say okay, and it's going to update that setting. So that is it, guys. And if you want to know how I retouch images, this video will help you find out how. So click it and I will see you in that video. Goodbye.